Welcome to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement, a podcast where we dive into the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being of the law enforcement officer.
Minor injury accident in the 2700 block of 156th Avenue Northeast.
All right, welcome back to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement. I'm your host, Vernon Phillips, and today we're going to talk about the BolaWrap. So with me today, we've got Kevin and we've got Chief Don. So I'm going to give them an opportunity to introduce themselves and to talk a little bit about their background and how they have gotten to where they are now, and then we'll get into discussion of the BolaWrap and what that is. So, guys, whoever wants to go first, you're up.
Kevin.
All right, I'll jump in. Vernon, first, pleasure to be here. We appreciate you having us both on. A little bit about my background. I was a banker for a number of years. So I transitioned over from banking into technology, and then technology into selling into public safety and law enforcement. So after my banking career, I started a software company that we sold basically security for opening and closing into banks and credit unions, and built that company up. I went from there. I transitioned over as CEO of a next generation 911 solution. So a company selling 911, but in addition to the smart 911 component, in addition to geolocation services using a cell phone and some other kind of advanced features in that realm. From there, I went into building a body-worn camera company. So I built a company called Intrinsic. We initially partnered with GoPro. And so taking GoPro technology into the public safety market as a body-worn solution, we migrated that company. In addition to selling GoPro technology, we built our own hardware solution. But really, Intrinsic is a software company that sold body-worn cameras. So that's how I like to position the company. So very kind of advanced and thinking forward. From that, I was able to take advantage of an opportunity to come over as the president of Wrap Technologies. I did that in April of 2022. And then I served as president for right at a year. And then I was appointed as CEO back in April of this year. So that's kind of my migration from going from a financial background, moving into, into technology, and then moving into sales of that technology into public safety.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. And Chief, how about you?
Listen, a little different background, and there's a reason why he's the CEO and I'm not. So I started in law enforcement in January 1981, when here in South Florida, it was the height of the Mariel boat lift, and very blessed to get picked up by the city of Miami Beach. Did 26 and a half years there, the last 6 as the chief. Went on to become the chief of the town of Golden Beach after that, and spent about 3 years there. And in 2014, I joined the Doral Police Department for the last 4 years of my career. Additionally, I was the past president of the International Association of Chiefs of Police, which represents 175 countries now, about 32 senior executives in law enforcement. And while I was president in 2017, some of the folks who were starting this up came to see us at the ICP, said, hey, we have this idea about this device that could be used early on, instead of using pain compliance. And it took me like 2 or 3 minutes while they're talking about this. And I go, listen, if this thing works, you're going to fill a gap in the tools we currently use, because we go from talking to people to using pain compliance. And I go, if this works, if you figure it out, call me. Sure enough, lo and behold, I finished being president in November 2017. I start working with the team on BolaWrap. And now it's gotten even more exciting. We have virtual reality, which is a great way to train folks in policing right now, get all the work done up front in a minimal amount of time, but it's quality training. And also now with the body cams, I think it's an exciting time to be part of the Wrap team.
All right. Well, I appreciate that. So what is the BolaWrap? So just for those that are listening, those that are watching, give them an idea. What's the BolaWrap? Because there's some people that probably don't know what it is. I've shared with you guys before, I've done a little bit of research. I've watched some of your videos, some of your online segments and the newsreels of the BolaWrap, what it is and what it does. But why don't you give us an idea?
Yeah, I'm happy to jump into that, Vernon. It's, what the BolaWrap is, it's a handheld device that an officer would carry. It has a 7.5-foot Kevlar cord in it. If you have an individual, they're non-compliant, maybe they need to be arrested, or maybe they need help. They need to be taken in for whatever reason. You think about when that individual says, if I said, hey, Vernon, you're under arrest, you need to put your hands behind your back, or Vernon, I need you to turn around, put your hands behind your back, we need to get you some help. And when you say no, what are an officer's options at that point, right? So it's either I'm going to go hands-on, or I'm going to use some form. What's typically on an officer's belt is some form of pain compliance. So whether it's a taser, CEW, whether it's a pepper ball, pepper spray, some type of inflammatory agent, even to a baton, those are pain-inflicting, potentially injury-causing types of solutions that an officer carries. The difference with the BolaWrap is that BolaWrap 150 will deploy that Kevlar cord. It will simply wrap the individual. So there's a sight and a surprise and a sound and a sensation that will typically change the behavior of the individual, allowing the officer to come in and safely detain that person without injury, typically to the officer or the individual. And so I'd never like to focus on what the device is and how it works. I really like to focus on what the outcome is. What's the outcome we're all looking for worldwide? As from a law enforcement standpoint, it's how do we, de-escalate situations without anyone getting injured? How do we reduce uses of force? How do we decrease, subject injury? How do we increase officer safety? How do we limit liability to that agency, to the individual officers, to the municipality? That's what our technology does, and that's why it's so instrumental. That's the value of where we sit right now in 2023, the situation where really the market is coming to us. We're looking for that outcome that I just outlined, and that's the benefit of our technology.
Vernon, if I could just jump in, Kevin brings up a real important conversation. We've seen how policing has been shifted to the de facto social services. Everything is thrown at the feet of the police to deal with, from homelessness, mental health. And the calls really consume much more of our time than people could ever imagine. So when you're stuck in that place between you can no longer talk to them and you're not ready to use pain compliance, we're actually the only tool right now in policing that could be used. So I always say, I call you to help my son who's on the spectrum, or somebody who is intoxicated in my family. And then you come out there and then you use a pain compliance tool is unacceptable unless it rises to that level. So here the officers are caught because on our end in policing, we haven't done the right job if we've given them the tools to use, and they only have extreme force. So hence, the wrap fits right in there. You can resolve an issue before it escalates, get somebody the help they need without causing pain. Thus, liability comes down, and I know Kevin and I will have a conversation about that. Just putting this tool on your belt will save, the money in a municipality or a big city is in a number they would never imagine.
Okay. So to kind of play, the devil's advocate a little bit. So, I'm the 15-year veteran, right? And you guys are talking to me about the BolaWrap, how it can better provide me officer safety, how it can de-escalate situations. And you're telling me that the tools I currently carry right now, my taser, my spray, my baton, things like that are not always effective. So I'm standing here and I'm saying, well, why does what you have going to better me? Right? Because if you're that 15, 20 plus year guy, maybe even some of the newer guys that have this idea of what tool they need and for what the situation is, and you're saying, hey, you need to come in, this is the tool you need for different type of scenarios. Why do I need this? How is this a benefit to me? You understand where I'm going with that?
So, Kevin, can I jump on it first? First, let me tell you, Doc, they usually have their arms crossed like this, the 15-year veteran, how are you going to change my mind? And I always say seeing is believing. But when you talk to an officer and tell them this won't count as a use of force in most agencies, it won't go against you, by using a tool like this. It's like using remote handcuffs in most cases. But also, you're not going to injure somebody. No police officer wants to go to work and create injury to themselves. And then also, it's a gut check, a chance for officers to look into a mirror and say, how often do I actually use that baton? And I can't think of an uglier weapon to use in public than a baton. But we usually use it to crack open a window, break something to get access to it. And there's also been associations out there that call for how often do we use gas? So imagine if you could just displace something you never used to something you could use earlier, and then actually going through a demonstration where they get to see how it works. I always say, there was a Motorola representative at one of our demos early on. We did it, room full of 50 people. I'm watching. He's not looking at the demo. He's looking at the faces of the officer. And so when it's over, I go, what just happened? Why didn't you watch it? He goes, it doesn't matter what I think. Their expressions tell me everything. There's an aha moment because that pop, that sound disorients somebody. Hence, you don't have to go physically on there and grab them while they're free. And then you secure them and you can take them into custody. I'm telling you, the buy-in has been greater than I ever believed it would be, and I'm happy about it. So, Kevin, jump in if you think of something I missed.
No, it's Vernon, to your point. If an officer's coming into a situation where an individual, they have a weapon, they have a gun, it's not, the BolaWrap is not the right tool. That is, and so it's not our goal to necessarily replace anything on the belt. There are benefits to other tools that officers carry. It's just kind of understanding, I mean, to Don's point, about 2% of interactions, actually about 1.7 domestically in the U.S., about 1.7% of the time, interactions among officers and subjects are uses of force. Our goal is to reduce that number. And so bringing that number down. And when you look at it, we have multiple studies out there. There's a Garner and Maxwell study, which is probably the best, the most recognized study that shows where the BolaWrap lands on that. And some folks will say use of force continuum, and some will say, a force chart. I mean, there are different terminology for it. But the reality is a BolaWrap sits lower than what handcuffs do. And so it's when verbal commands break down, that's when the BolaWrap is used. It's an early and often tool. And so that we don't escalate to a situation. However, if an officer's coming into that 15-year veteran to come into a situation and the subject has a gun, then the BolaWrap is not the tool that needs to be brought out at that point. It's you're going to equal that force. But you also have to understand that about 55% of the time when a BolaWrap is deployed, it's on an individual who's in some form of mental crisis, right? And so we have 53 million Americans in the U.S. right now with some form of mental illness. That's 1 in 5. And we also, there's some staggering numbers out there, some staggering, when you look at that someone with an untreated mental illness is 16 times more likely to be killed by law enforcement. How do we lower those numbers? How do we reduce that down? But it's by being able to use a restraint tool early so that situations don't always escalate. You can't, as an officer, come into a mental health call when that individual, they're not hurting themselves, they're not hurting someone else, they're not hurting the officers. What are your options? And so think about from a liability standpoint, well, we use the BolaWrap first. Hopefully it will work, and we see about 86% of the time it does work. But if we do have to escalate that situation up, we've done everything we could to prevent that from becoming a use of force. And that, I think that's the benefit, whether you're a rookie, it's your first day, or whether you're that 15-year veteran, you understand and recognize the value in what that would be able to provide for you.
Okay. And I think that's a good point, is leading off of the fact, like, look, it's not going to be something that's going to be utilized in every situation, right? I mean, if you're responding to, a shooting, you're not going to get out and pull the BolaWrap. And I think that's probably where there needs to be a little bit of clarification, especially with some of the ones that are a little bit more apprehensive, like, okay, well, you're just trying to get me to be, a little bit more soft, or, in the way I police. Now, we all know that there are some officers out there that need to practice their verbal judo, right? Their art of de-escalation. And because there's always those guys that come on, they get on scene, and automatically everything just kind of amps right up, right? So, what's the buy-in from other agencies? So, you're looking at agencies across the U.S. How many are starting to utilize this, and what's the effective? I don't want to say success rate, right? Or what's the effectiveness of implementing the BolaWrap at their agencies currently right now?
Sure, Don, if you don't care, I'll jump on that one first.
Sure.
It's we're pushing about 1,100 agencies in the United States that have implemented BolaWrap as that de-escalation tool. We're in 63 countries worldwide. So we've been around. Wrap as a company, we've been around since 2017. We're publicly traded. We're NASDAQ listed. We have about 36,000 investors, many of whom are in law enforcement. So we're seeing a widespread acceptance, and we see that grow dramatically. And it's growing because you look at where we are again as a society. We're all looking for ways to in a more humane way, treat individuals. Again, it's not the be all end all solution out there, but understanding this is the direction that we have to go. That if you have that, again, someone who's mentally challenged, someone that we're in some form of mental crisis. Maybe it's an autistic child. We had an example with a body-worn video that came in from an agency in Pennsylvania recently, where a mother calls in and says her son, he's autistic. He's been aggressive with law enforcement before. She's been hesitant to call law enforcement, but understanding coming in that this young man can be very combative. When officers arrived at the scene, he was out in the road. He had been throwing things. Very large young man at that point. Her son was, and rather than officers fighting with that young man, they called an officer in who had a BolaWrap. They were able to wrap that young man and see the outcome change. You just see his behavior totally change. His voice was escalated. He was in an aggressive stance, and when the BolaWrap was deployed, totally changed his behavior. Attitude changed. They were able to get him in, get him the help that he needed, and then we think about what is success. Like, what is success with the BolaWrap? And we define success as it's a better outcome on both sides, right? It's a better outcome for the officer, and it's a better outcome for the individual. And you don't always see that with other tools that are on an officer's belt, especially tools that rely on some form of pain compliance.
Okay, yeah. Chief, you had something you want to add into that?
No, I think Kevin covered it perfect.
So I do have a question. So, and I'm going to kind of direct this towards you, Chief. So, you being in law enforcement, coming from law enforcement, and, because of the amount of years that you've spent in law enforcement, you kind of, some of that you have, and I say this with no disrespect at all, but you probably have a little bit of the old mindset, right? Where you kind of come in, let's take care of business, let's get the job done. So knowing that and you having that history, what is the value that you see in the BolaWrap, moving forward that you think, man, if we would have had this, 10, 15 years ago, 20 years ago, just the effectiveness of it?
Can I tell you something? That's a great question. You have to create buy-in, right? There's no way around that. But I always tell everybody, about 22 years ago, there was an event happened in South Florida where a young man had a shard of glass in his hand. Police surrounded him. He started moving forward. Next thing you know, he's shot and killed, right? Unfortunately, that was the resolution because we didn't have tools like the BolaWrap. And I think, it takes that, gut check for agents to say, how do we get better? How do we become more progressive? How do we become transparent? And it's being bold. And, right now we have 1,100 agencies. I tell everybody, those are early adopters. Those are chiefs that are forward thinking. They're not waiting for an event to change their agency and to get it done. But I tell you now, when we go in there, the chiefs usually are the starting point for a lot of agencies because they're out there, they see these things. But once you get the buy-in from the trainers and within an organization and they see the success, and Hillsborough County is probably a perfect example in South Florida. They've almost doubled their size of their first purchase to continue expanding into a patrol. I really believe that every officer will carry this on their belt before we know it, because it's something more often than not, calls are at the lower end of the spectrum. They're not all hot calls. And I know we prepare for the hot calls, but the truth is we spend more of the time at the other end of the spectrum communicating, dealing with situations, calming people down. And this is a tool that we have to use there. So I think, I want it done yesterday would be my thought, but there has to be patience. We're rewinding a culture. We're recalibrating the tools we have. Not that they're bad tools. The goal is to displace pain compliance when it's not applicable. And I think that's the selling point here. Who wants to have a use of force? Who wants to injure somebody? Who wants to see somebody face plant because a taser was used because that's the only option you have, right? If you get wrapped and let's say you trip, you can break your fall because your hands are free. You're not immobilized. And I think there's a big upside to, the communication we do when we try to sell something within an organization. And listen, you deal with the other side of it. when somebody uses extreme force and there's pain and there's injury, officers get caught up in it. They get red flagged for these reasons. And our job is to protect them for 25 years, not for 5 minutes. So that's my 2 cents.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And I think that answers that question pretty well. So what I want to do is I've got a clip, one of your media clips that I just wanted to share real quick, if you're good with that, just to kind of give everybody an idea of what the BolaWrap is, what it looks like for those that aren't familiar with it. So if you guys give me a second here, we're gonna pop that over here.
Pepper spray, because it does not rely on pain to gain compliance.
And buys us time to be able to move in and make that arrest.
Springfield police will soon be using a new restraint device to help gain control of unruly suspects with less force. Police Superintendent Cheryl Clapper is confident the city would find these restraints to be a useful de-escalation tool, especially in potential mental health calls.
Officers at the Lowell Police Department are using what's called a BolaWrap.
It's a safer way to take people in custody. It shows the community that we're trying to do it better and to try to serve and protect them better.
The SPD is also piloting the BolaWrap. Seattle City Councilwoman Lisa Herbold supported the officers using the BolaWrap after seeing how it worked in person. She said it's another de-escalation tool and technique to reduce a tragic outcome when somebody poses a violent threat to themselves, police, or anyone else.
So obviously, when you look at that, I mean, that's kind of self-explanatory what the BolaWrap is. You may have had a better clip that you wanted to show, but that's the one I pulled up there. I was able to grab. So if somebody wants to see more of the media, of the more of news, kind of looking at that, and also the effectiveness, where can they find that?
Vernon, they could go to our YouTube channel. So Wrap, we have a YouTube page, or just go to wrap.com. So WRAP.com. We have a lot of body worn video, listed there. For us, it's a great tool. It's very much seeing is believing with the solution. So when we can, get those body worn videos in, being able to show officers, how the technology works in a real world situation. And so that is the best training tool, but it's also the best kind of understanding tool to be able to show what our technology is.
And Vernon, if I could just comment, that those videos there that we showed, they're static. The officer's standing in front of them. You can stand on the side, behind, up to 25 feet away and use this device. They could be walking. We have people, and we have videos of people who are actually start to flee, and they get wrapped. So, there's a lot of more use to this than people can imagine, besides people who are just non-compliant, don't want to talk. There are tactical teams that use it. It's a broad range. It's a great opportunity.
Yeah. So that was just one of the, media coverages, the kind of, a culmination of what you guys, so you said
Right.
You actually have body worn camera that you upload to your site as well.
What we'll do is we typically encourage, an agency that if they have a deployment, if they would share that body worn video with us. I mean, often agencies can, often agencies cannot. We'll typically, if they share it with us, we'll redact that, or they'll send a redacted video in, something that they're allowing us to be able to publish out. I mean, obviously, for the most part, if it's not involved in a case, it is public information, but we do try and protect, individuals as much as we can. But it's a great tool for us. It's a great way to be able to show, hey, this is how our technology works in the real world. So whether it's that individual who is just, excited, ready to, to be aggressive with officers, whether it's that, that autistic child with a knife or whatever, it may be, just the benefits of the technology, how it's it's applied in a real world scenario.
Yeah, and I think that's going to be a big key factor with cops is actually seeing it played out in real life, in real time. We can watch the demonstration videos. You can have somebody come and you can do a demonstration video. Right? It's very, very static, like the chief said. But when you actually show real body-worn camera footage of it actually being utilized and being, put into practice, I think then you start to see people maybe have a little bit better reaction to the BolaWrap and what its intended use is for, and just as it being another tool, another resource, another option that you have in various situations. So I'm glad that you do have that option, you have that availability to show that when you can.
And Vernon, if I could just comment, we go to a lot of trade shows and we have the devices there, and then we also have virtual reality. We put them in a headset where they can pick up the BolaWrap device, and there's 40 plus now scenarios they can run through. And you can see how intense they get with the virtual reality, how real training is now, how this generation of policing grew up in a virtual reality world where you and I and others would be taken off the street for 8 hours. They'd have to backfill for us. Now, with 1 hour, we can accomplish what would take 8 hours before with this new kind of training virtual reality. So I say, we go to trade shows and we put the VR on them, and they actually get to see the BolaWrap instead of us trying to articulate or ask them to watch a video. And it's a great way to prepare people through virtual reality training. But also, I know there's a crowd out there. A lot of these folks, about 17,000, will be heading out to the ICP conference, and I hope they stop by and say hello to us and kick the tires, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. So we know, I've got a kind of a question I want to ask just for both of you and just the benefit of the BolaWrap. So we know that right now, mental health, mental wellness is big in law enforcement, first responders community. So looking at that, looking at what the option the BolaWrap offers, what type of benefit can that offer when we start talking about the overall mental well-being of officers and cops?
Yeah. Kevin, I'll jump in first. You're talking about a conversation, Vernon, that should be paramount in every organization, right? The mental health of our officers.
Oh, absolutely.
We just realized we just started to peel this back, what it seems in this last 5 years, having this conversation where mental health and mental well-being about officers is now at the forward of a conversation. So I would tell you, anytime you can give an officer a tool that's not going to cause them to cause pain on somebody, because no matter what anybody thinks, getting in a fist fight with somebody is traumatic. Pulling out your taser, pulling out a baton and striking, that is a traumatic event that over time wears on people. Pulling out a firearm, never you just pulling it out so anytime you can intervene and stop something before it ever escalates helps the mental well-being. But also, I think it lets your officers, the men and women you're supposed to take care of, know that you care about them by giving them other options. And sometimes some of that mental well-being is preparing them, but also it is having professionals like yourself within the organization coming to do the well checks. How do you flag an officer sooner when they've been to X amount of calls? So I think it's a holistic approach, but I also believe the tools we give officers and the training we give officers is paramount. I wish we could pull every officer out for 40, 80 hours a year, right? Give them all this training. You can't. So what? Hence, virtual reality training. You condense it, but you do it more often and frequent, and it sticks with them. But this is a conversation that's not going to go away. You're going to see officers, they come out now and talk about it. I have people close to me that know they can go to pick up a phone and set up an appointment, and nobody ever knows about it and get the help they need. So anything we could do on a day-to-day basis to help them get there and take care of them, it's our job.
Yeah, I'll expand on that, Vernon. We recently had a body-worn video coming in, and this was an individual. He was in Texas, and he had a knife, and he had stabbed his girlfriend. So domestic issue, and an officer rolled in, and the guy was just very excited, very aggressive, and the officer had lethal. So the officer had his weapon, trained on that individual. He was charging, being aggressive at the officer. Officer would have been, I believe, justified had he had to discharge his weapon. But he asked his partner to, hey, cover me with lethal. He transitioned over to the BolaWrap. They were able to wrap that individual, get him into custody. And, two people went home that night, and it was not their worst day. when there's an officer involved shooting, 2 people go down always, and that's so that understanding we're able to use our tool to be able to, in no doubt, save a life. Part of our mantra is, we save lives and we save careers, and that's what the technology does. You're seeing this escalating number of suicide by cop that are happening out there in the U.S. domestically. Last year we had about 1,100 shootings, officer involved shootings, and up to 30% of those were suicide by cop. Was at a conference not long ago, and there was a young lady there, and it was very impactful in the conference that they start running a video, and the video is a call coming in to the officer. They have this dash cam video, they have the body worn video, and the call coming in is there's a young girl in a parking lot with a knife. We roll directly into the call, and there the officer rolls in. This is in California, and he says, "Hey, someone had a call about someone with a knife," and she pulls out the knife, and he says, "No, put the knife down, ma'am. Put the knife down. Put the knife away." And she would not put the knife down. She kept walking toward him, and when she did, he drew his weapon. She charged the officer, and it was justified in the officer shooting her. He shot her 3 times. At that point, they stopped the video, and the girl walked out, and the officer walked out. So even though she was shot 3 times, she lived. But it was very impactful. And then in speaking with her afterward, listening to her story, she was having her worst day. Her mother was going through cancer. She had broken up with her boyfriend. She was 17 years old at the time. Now she's 21, and she sees her intent was not to harm that officer, to do anything. Her intent was simply to die that day, and she didn't want to kill herself. But she knows the BolaWrap. She made the statement, and she feels that if the officer would have had a BolaWrap, she would not have been shot. She just needed stopped. She needed shocked out of whatever the situation was she was going through. Unfortunately, she was shot, but fortunately she did live. But think about how that might have been different had the officer had a BolaWrap at that time.
Great story.
Yeah. So what is your goal? What's your all's goal with the BolaWrap and with law enforcement? Looking to the future of law enforcement. What is your goal with that?
I'll speak on that. The goal is every officer in the world carries this device every single day. And that would be the ultimate goal. Obviously, that's a very lofty goal, maybe an unattainable goal, but it really is. Like how we make situations better. And we mentioned earlier, it's not the be all end all, but it is really the only potential tool that an officer could carry that would allow them to be able to de-escalate that situation, to have a better outcome without harming that individual or themselves. And so that's the benefit to it. We have a suite of technologies. Chief had mentioned earlier about, our Wrap Reality. So we have a virtual reality training platform, and we deal with everything you would expect in a training platform. So it may be an active shooter event. It may be uses of force, but we go a lot further in that, is training that verbal judo. You mentioned that earlier. It's being able to use our words to be able to de-escalate a situation, to be able to, maybe it's duty to intervene, maybe it's bias training, maybe it's dealing with that individual who is suicidal, that elderly man with dementia. So being able to train for all of those pieces to it. And then now with our full line of products, so we have, our non-lethal solution, we have our training platform, and now we have body-worn cameras, digital evidence, case management. So being able to take whatever the situation is, we're going to encompass that and provide this one solution to fully benefit law enforcement. And that's what my goal is for our company.
Okay. Hard to top that. I think the return on investment in something like this is big, and maybe Kevin will talk about that before we end this call. But I mean, we spend so much money in lawsuits and litigation because we use the wrong tool at the wrong time. It's hard to explain your way out of excessive force when somebody's got 35 stitches across their forehead. And, one or two of those lawsuits, you could have given all your officer and your team a BolaWrap. So, Kevin, do you want to say a little more about that? Because I know you know the numbers better than I do.
Yeah, we talk about, what a return on investment is. When you look at You just take the top 25 agencies over the last 10 years have paid $3.2 billion in excessive use of force claims. So it's $3.2 billion. You've even reached a point where a lot of municipal underwriters don't want to deal with cities because of their law enforcement department. So you have bond holders, you have reinsurers, you have underwriters. They don't want to touch it because it just becomes too expensive. We have a committee, we have a group of users, and we had a committee meeting about a month ago. I asked one of the chiefs at the meeting, I said, how do you quantify what the return on investment is for a BolaWrap? And he said, I do it very simply. You know, the cost of a cassette is a few dollars. The other side of it is about 100,000. And so it's not hard to being able to weigh, you know, what a use of force costs us. And you look at certain cities, we even to the point that we say that if an agency deploys BolaWrap, they deploy it enterprise-wide for 12 months. If they don't see a significant reduction in their use of force numbers, we buy the devices back. So we put our money where our mouth is. We have a lot of data showing that your numbers as an agency will come way down. Situations will get way better. The city will spend a lot less than what they are, whether they're self-insured or whether they have, you know, a risk pool or they have an insurer managing them. We reduce those numbers and we guarantee it. And I believe we're the only company selling into law enforcement that does that at this point.
Well, I appreciate that. I appreciate both of you sharing that. So if there's somebody interested in learning more about the BolaWrap, or they want to have somebody talk to them, or maybe even do a demonstration or get some type of training or anything like that, where would they go and who would they contact for that?
Sure. They can come to our website. So it's wrap.com, WRAP.com. We have a contact page on there. Simply fill out a form and we'll reach out to them. We'll guarantee you we'll reach out to you within 4 hours. Or they can email me. So my email is just Mullins. So KMULLINS @wrap.com. Email me. That's my email. I guarantee you someone will reach out to you very, very quickly.
All right. And then is there an agency right now that's completely 100% bought into this that you would say, hey, reach out to them and they'll tell you how effective this is, what good of a resource this is?
Yeah, I'd like to say that all of our agencies are reference customers. And so when we have folks that come on and say, hey, send us an agency, we'd like to see 3 or 4 references, we'll give you our entire list. So we have about 1,100 agencies that we work with out there. We have great agencies. We have great partners. There's a lot of media out there. We just was announced this past week that we're expanding and extending where we are within the Los Angeles Police Department. Don had mentioned earlier, Hillsborough in Florida, great agency. And they've had 52 deployments, I think, now. So that's 52 situations over the last couple years, less than 2 years, where they were able to de-escalate, make the situation better, and fully utilizing the technology. So if there are, if someone does want to talk to our references out there, we're happy to do that. We have industry experts. We have folks like Chief Don Delucca here, who can speak as a titan in the industry. Being able to give them whatever reference they might potentially need.
Well, I appreciate that. And yeah, sorry, go ahead, Chief.
Vernon, I was going to tell you, I can't tell you how grateful we are that you take the time to have these conversations, but also for what you do for officers. We can't talk enough about the mental well-being of policemen, and thanks for what you do.
Well, I appreciate that. And that's the whole goal is, we want those in law enforcement and first responder community in general to, not only thrive in their career, but to survive their career, right? And when we talk about career survival, right, we're not just talking about, making it till 30 years or 35 years or whatever that is. We're talking physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, right? Financially. There's so many areas that we want just this law enforcement first responders just to survive and thrive. And I appreciate you guys for coming on and just talking a little bit about the BolaWrap and just, the benefit that it is and what it can do in the current law enforcement community. So I appreciate you guys for sure.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Thanks, guys. I appreciate you tuning in and listening to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and share this resource with your fellow officers. The goal of Critical Aspects is to serve, support, and sustain the law enforcement professionals. So head over to www.criticalaspects.org for more resources and information. And as always, God bless and be safe.